As the crisp December air settled over the small town of Millbrook, Connecticut, a somber figure made her way through the snow-dusted paths of Oakwood Cemetery. Margaret Thompson, a woman in her late 30s with chestnut hair just beginning to show strands of silver, navigated the familiar route to her husband's grave. The cemetery's usual quiet was punctuated by the distant jingling of sleigh bells and the muffled sounds of holiday preparations from the nearby town. Margaret's breath formed small clouds in the cold air as she approached the headstone, its polished surface a stark contrast to the surrounding blanket of white. The date etched into the stone marked exactly 1 year since her beloved John had passed away. The weight of her loss felt heavier than ever, amplified by the cheerful holiday decorations adorning the cemetery gates and the neighboring houses. As she stood there, lost in memories, a gentle nudge against her leg startled her out of her reverie. Margaret looked down to find a young Labrador, no more than 1.5 years old, gazing up at her with warm brown eyes. The dog's golden coat was slightly matted and its ribs were visible beneath the fur, telling a story of recent hardship. For a moment, Margaret was taken aback by the unexpected visitor. The dog's tail wagged hesitantly, and its eyes seemed to mirror the loneliness Margaret felt in her heart. Without thinking, she reached down to pat the dog head, feeling the softness of its fur beneath her gloved hand. As Margaret knelt beside the headstone, the young lab settled next to her, offering silent companionship. The simple presence of the animal brought an unexpected warmth to the cold December day. Margaret found herself talking softly, sharing memories of John with this four-legged stranger, who seemed content to listen. Time passed unnoticed, and as the winter sun began to dip low in the sky, Margaret realized she couldn't leave this gentle creature alone in the cold. The spirit of the season, coupled with a sudden spark of purpose she hadn't felt in months, led her to a decision. She would take the dog home, at least for the night. As they walked together towards the cemetery gates, Margaret's eye caught a glint in the snow. Bending down, she picked up a tarnished penny near a small wreath. A faint smile crossed her face as she pocketed the coin, inspiration striking. "Penny," she murmured, looking down at her new companion. The dog's ears perked up at the sound, and Margaret knew she had found the perfect name. The walk home was a novelty for Margaret. For the first time in 1 year, she found herself noticing the twinkling lights strung across porches and the wreaths adorning doors. Penny trotted beside her, occasionally sniffing at patches of snow or looking up at Margaret as if to make sure she was still there. Arriving at her modest 2-story home, Margaret hesitated for a moment before opening the door. The house had been John's pride and joy, and entering it alone had become a painful daily ritual. But today, with Penny at her side, the threshold didn't seem quite so daunting. Inside, Margaret set about making Penny comfortable. She filled a bowl with water and rummaged through her fridge, finding some leftover chicken which she warmed and offered to the grateful dog. As Penny ate, Margaret found herself talking aloud, explaining to the dog where things were in the house and what the house rules would be. The sound of her own voice after so many months of silence was strange but oddly comforting. That night, as Margaret prepared for bed, she realized with a start that she hadn't thought about her loneliness all evening. Penny had kept her busy and engaged, from their impromptu exploration of the backyard to the amusing struggle of bath time. As she settled under the covers, Penny curled up on the rug beside the bed, the gentle sound of the dog's breathing a soothing presence in the once too quiet room. The next few days brought a flurry of activity to Margaret's previously monotonous life. She found herself rising earlier, spurred by Penny's eager whines for breakfast and a morning walk. Their daily strolls took them through the neighborhood into the nearby park where the town's grand Christmas tree stood proudly at the center. On these walks, Margaret began to notice her neighbors in a way she hadn't for the past year. Mrs. Taylor from 2 doors down stopped to admire Penny, her eyes crinkling with smile lines as she offered a treat from her pocket. Tom, the retired mailman, paused during his own morning constitutional to exchange pleasantries and scratch behind Penny's ears. At the park, Margaret found herself drawn into conversations with other dog owners. She listened to stories about their pets, shared the tale of how she found Penny, and even found herself laughing at a joke about squirrel casing techniques. The simple act of engaging with others, something she had avoided for so long, began to chip away at the walls of isolation she had built around herself. As the days passed, Margaret's home began to transform. Penny's toys, a squeaky Santa, a rope fashioned into a candy cane, and a soft reindeer plush, found their way into every room. The refrigerator, once barely stocked, now held an assortment of foods as Margaret rediscovered her appetite and the joy of cooking for two. One evening, as Margaret sat in her favorite armchair reading a book, Penny climbed up and settled her head on Margaret's lap. The weight and warmth of the dog brought tears to Margaret's eyes, not of sadness, but of a bitter, sweet recognition of the companionship she had been missing. Margaret's relationship with Penny grew stronger with each passing day. The dog seemed to sense when Margaret was having a difficult moment, offering a gentle nuzzle or bringing over a toy to distract her. In return, Margaret found herself opening up, speaking to Penny about her fears, her memories of John, and her tentative hopes for the future. As Christmas drew nearer, Margaret surprised herself by pulling out the holiday decorations she had ignored the previous year. With Penny helping, by tangling herself in tinsel and batting at low-hanging ornaments, Margaret decorated a small tree. The house, which had felt so empty for so long, began to feel like a home again. The change in Margaret didn't go unnoticed by her neighbors. Mrs. Taylor invited her over for tea, and Margaret found herself accepting. Tom offered to help hang lights on her porch, a task John had always tackled with gusto. Even the local grocer, Mr. Patel, commented on her improved spirits when she stopped by for supplies, Penny waiting patiently outside. What once felt like anxious interactions now felt natural and welcome. Margaret realized that Penny, the dog she had impulsively picked up at the cemetery, was there to stay. Penny had become more than just a pet. She was a bridge back to the world Margaret had withdrawn from after John's passing. The dog's unconditional love and the simple routines of care had rekindled something in Margaret that she thought had been lost forever. As they walked through the park one crisp afternoon, the sound of carolers practicing for the upcoming town celebration filled the air. Margaret found herself humming along, her hand resting on Penny's head. The path ahead, dusted with fresh snow and lined with twinkling lights, seemed to stretch out with new possibilities. For the first time in a long while, Margaret looked forward to what tomorrow might bring, grateful for the four-legged companion who had helped her rediscover joy in the most unexpected of places. As Margaret and Penny continued their daily walks, the town of Millbrook seemed to come alive with holiday spirit. The air was filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon, and the sound of Christmas carols echoed through the streets. One particularly cold afternoon, they decided to take a different route, heading toward the bustling downtown area where holiday shoppers hurried between stores. Margaret was lost in thought, contemplating how much her life had changed since Penny had entered it. The sidewalks were crowded with last-minute Christmas shoppers, their arms laden with bags and packages. As they approached a busy intersection, Penny's usual eager pace suddenly changed. The dog stopped abruptly, planting her feet firmly on the ground. Margaret gently tugged at the leash, encouraging Penny to move forward. The walk signal had just turned green, and other pedestrians were already stepping off the curb, but Penny wouldn't budge. Instead, she backed up, using her body to push against Margaret's legs, forcing her to take several steps backward. Confused and slightly embarrassed by Penny's unusual behavior, Margaret was about to apologize to the irritated shoppers trying to get around them when she heard the screech of tires. A delivery truck, its driver distracted by a fallen package, ran the red light and barreled through the intersection, missing the group of pedestrians by inches. Time seemed to stand still as Margaret realized what had just happened. If Penny hadn't stopped her, she would have been directly in the truck's path. The dog's instincts and quick action had saved not only Margaret's life but potentially others as well. Nearby shoppers who had witnessed the incident gathered around them, amazed by Penny's actions. An elderly man approached them, his voice shaking as he described how he'd seen everything unfold. He praised Penny's incredible intuition and protective instinct. A small crowd formed around them, with people sharing similar stories of animals showing remarkable intelligence and protective behaviors. As the adrenaline of the near miss subsided, Margaret knelt beside Penny, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized the depth of their connection. This wasn't just a stray dog she'd taken in. This was a remarkable creature who had just saved her life. The incident gave Margaret the certainty that she could no longer imagine life without Penny. That evening, she made an appointment with the local veterinarian, determined to make their arrangement permanent. The next morning, they headed to the clinic where Dr. Anderson gave Penny a thorough examination. During the checkup, Dr. Anderson discovered something unexpected: a microchip. Margaret's heart sank as the veterinarian explained that they could use this to locate Penny's original owners. Part of her had known this day might come, but after yesterday's events, the thought of losing Penny was almost unbearable. The veterinarian made the necessary calls, and within hours they had contact information for Penny's original family, the Johnsons, who had recently moved to Millbrook from a neighboring town. Margaret's hands trembled as she dialed their number, her heart heavy with the possibility of saying goodbye to her furry savior. The Johnsons were overjoyed to hear news of their lost dog, whom they called Luna. They explained how she had escaped during their move several months ago, and despite their extensive search, they had been unable to find her. They arranged to meet at the town park the next day. That night, Margaret barely slept. She kept replaying the incident at the intersection in her mind, marveling at Penny's incredible instinct and intelligence. The thought of parting with her now, after everything they'd been through, seemed impossible. The next morning it dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the ground. The park was decorated for Christmas, with twinkling lights and garlands adorning the trees. Margaret and Penny arrived early, walking slowly along the paths they had come to know so well. When the Johnsons arrived, Margaret's heart ached at the sight of their joy. The two children ran forward, calling out, "Luna!" Penny's tail wagged furiously as she recognized them, but she remained firmly by Margaret's side, looking up at her as if seeking permission. The families exchanged stories, the Johnsons telling of their frantic search when Luna disappeared, and Margaret sharing the tale of finding Penny in the cemetery, and most importantly, the miraculous save at the intersection just days before. As Margaret recounted the incident with the truck, describing how Penny's actions had saved her life, the Johnsons listened with growing amazement, their eyes filled with tears as Margaret described the profound impact Penny had had on her life, helping her emerge from grief and reconnect with her community. The children, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. The older one, a girl of about 10, turned to her parents and said something that surprised everyone. She suggested that maybe Luna was meant to find Margaret, to save her in more ways than one. Mr. Johnson pulled his wife aside for a quiet conversation. When they returned, their eyes were glistening with tears. They explained that seeing the incredible bond between Margaret and Penny, and hearing about how they had saved each other, Penny literally saving Margaret's life and Margaret saving Penny from life as a stray, had made them reconsider. While they loved Luna dearly, they could see that she had found her true purpose with Margaret. The timing of her appearance in Margaret's life, the deep connection they shared, and most importantly, Penny's heroic act, all seemed to point to something bigger than coincidence. With heavy but hopeful hearts, the Johnsons made the difficult decision to let Penny stay with Margaret. They explained to their children that sometimes love means recognizing when someone else needs something, or someone, more than you do. The children, though sad, seemed to understand the significance of their dog's heroic act and her special bond with Margaret. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Margaret invited the Johnsons to visit Penny whenever they wanted. They exchanged contact information, and Margaret promised to send regular updates and photos. As the family said their goodbyes, giving Penny one last hug, there wasn't a dry eye in the group. As the Johnsons walked away, Margaret knelt down beside Penny, who had remained faithfully by her side throughout the emotional encounter. She hugged her furry hero tightly, thankful for all the ways this remarkable dog had changed her life. As they walked through the park, the sound of distant carolers added to the magical atmosphere. Margaret and Penny moved in perfect sync, their footsteps crunching in the snow, creating a rhythm that seemed to echo the beating of their hearts. The bond between them, forged through loneliness, strengthened through daily routines, and cemented by Penny's heroic act, was stronger than ever. The Christmas lights twinkled in the trees, casting a magical glow over the snow-dusted path as Margaret and Penny began their walk home. Each step felt lighter, as though the holiday decorations illuminated not just the path ahead, but a future filled with hope and new beginnings. Passers-by smiled at the heartwarming sight of the woman and her loyal dog, unaware that this Christmas had delivered a miracle, a gift of love and second chances for Margaret and her faithful companion. Margaret and Penny's journey during the holiday season reminds us how love can find us when we least expect it, even in the most unlikely places. Have you ever experienced a connection like this? Share your story in the comments below. If their bond touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more inspiring stories of hope and companionship.